I've heard the word Montessori. Conceptually, I understand, like, I know why Inley is interesting, perhaps. What, if you were to ground the person listening to this into maybe like two or three sentences on Montessori as a methodology and why, and I think most importantly, how it's valuable to their student? Can you do that for us? Like, give us a framework to operate within in terms of the Montessori concept.
Sure. I think Montessori, in every way, respects individuals and helps them discover and grow to their potential and gives them the self confidence and willingness. I think our kids love to learn. So all of those pieces come together in a way that helps shape the individual. So our kids don't compete with each other necessarily. They compete with themselves. I did this last time and I'd like to do this much work the next time or learn this much more the next time. So it becomes that intrinsic motivation.
Yeah, it's interesting. The idea of self motivation, to your point, and then the sort of ability, the freedom, it sounds like, where I'm picturing, because I'm an analogies person. So, like, I'm picturing, we're all set on the highway, if you will, together. We're driving down the road, but our guardrails, are sort of set in a way that allows us to navigate different lanes and get on and off the highway whenever we need to. We're not stuck in one lane at one speed in one direction, et cetera. We get the freedom to drive our vehicle. But again, there's some guardrails, there's a bit of a framework so that we learn and we grow within a certain sort of direction. That's a lot of what I'm hearing you say.
That's absolutely correct. And I think over time, we actually end up building our own cars, which surround us and keep us going. That's the gift, I think, is that understanding that who am I question is a huge byproduct of this work. Our kids really understand themselves as people, as learners, as humans, as people in relationships with teachers, with their families, with their classmates, etc., built on this framework.
I love that. So again, I mean, I love the analogy. So I'm picturing like building a really cool car right now, and how every student gets to build their own.
And paint their own and design their own car. And it's really, I think, a gift that's a lifelong gift. It stays with them forever because they know they have the power to do that.
Yeah, that's magical. I've even met people. I'm 38 for reference sake for folks listening, but like I've met people in my age group that have said, oh, I was a Montessori kid, and there's a difference. There's an absolute difference in terms of, to your point, comfortability, confidence, ability to have interpersonal relationships and connect with their peers. So I feel like you're changing the world one student at a time.
We hope we are. And we certainly hear that from the high schools and colleges that our kids go to after graduation, that they are the kids that see the big picture and can go to a head of school without hesitation because they talk easily with adults and say, I notice you don't have such and such a club. I'd like to start one. Can you, give me the power to do so? That kind of thing, which is, self-advocacy and using their will and imagination to create something new. And they believe they can.
That's awesome. So I'm hearing you talk about this and thinking a lot about where it was. So you said started in, I wrote this down, I think 1973. Is that right? Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, we're in our 50th year, which is a real gift. And as we said before, it started as a very small place in one wing of the one of the houses, and then they just started building on their property. So one classroom at a time. It was sort of like a good old New England farmhouse. They'd attach one and then the next, and they'd negotiate. If you're a plumber, I'll give you free tuition if you'll add two bathrooms to this new thing that we're putting in on the school. And it was a good old fashioned, let's build this and we know they'll come. And it happened. Yeah.
It's so great. Yep. And now, I mean, so now I don't want to skip the middle. We're going to go back to it. But now, how many students are at the school? Back from a few in the beginning to how many now?
340 students, yeah. And so, yeah, when I started which was 27 years ago, we had 140 students on 3 acres. Now we have 340 on 14 acres. So we've purchased most of the property around, renovated, built a variety of things over time.
And so during that growth, then you've had everything from I'm sure more students, obviously more property. How has the framework of how the students learn maybe it's in depth or width, but how is the evolution of Inley as a school in terms of size, to your description, and scale? How has that changed the way that the students themselves have an opportunity to learn? Like, have you added more classes? Have you added more curriculum? How has the actual evolution of the program itself gone over the last, 27 years you've been here?
Um, I would say we've always kept the Montessori foundation, which is really important to know. That is what drives us every day. However, we also know that Maria Montessori died in the 1950s. Lots has happened in the world and in the world of education since then. So what we're very diligent about is saying, let's look at a new reading program. Let's make sure it matches our Montessori beliefs and foundations, and say, will that match or not? And can we embed that and integrate it in meaningful ways into our school? So we've looked at every piece of our work, all of our curriculum, to say, how do we help our kids, right? And because the kids and their families are at the center of all of the decisions we make here. Over time, keeping that as a central piece, we've added what we call Montessori Plus. And as I said, Maria died a long time ago. However, I think her aspirations live on. And for Montessori Plus, we are particular about describing what those pluses are and how they integrate with who we are. So, keeping Montessori at the center, we certainly look at experiential learning. What is it that when our students go on field studies and learn beyond the four walls of their classroom, what does that mean? What does that look like? And how do we make that authentic? We look at their social emotional well-being every day in every way. We understand that kids need to feel happy, comfortable with themselves, and engaged to learn. Which is great. We've got a huge arts and athletics program here, again, meshed into and integrated with the work that we do. And we have a huge innovation and imagination program that we teach very specifically to enhance what we call our comprehensive academic program.
So, in that framework, then, are there challenges that you've experienced over the last 27 years in terms of whether that's adoption or the way that I would say prospective students, but I think more importantly, parents, to your point, receive and understand the model? Or do you see that people look at it and say, well, that makes sense, and they just sort of dive in head first?
I think we have all kinds of parents, so we have all those reactions and more. I would say that the parents that come to us are people that say, like our founders, I think education can be more than sitting behind a desk and someone opening up my head and dumping information in and saying, okay, let's see how that turns out. Instead, we contextualize things for kids and we help them really understand that you can get all kinds of content in many different places, but it's more than just understanding content. It's really becoming a thinker about that content, and how do I take that in? How do I match that content with my ethical understanding of the world and make sense of it, and then understand my own position within something. And that's a long process. That doesn't happen to a 7-year-old magically on a Tuesday, right? It happens over time. And we scaffold that very conscientiously so that by the time our kids graduate from 8th grade, they really understand themselves and themselves in the context of the world and what their understanding of the world is, and their goals for I think it goes beyond the question people used to ask me when I was a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I think it goes sort of, what do you want to do? What kind of human are you going to be in the world? So it's a broader question that we ask our kids today, and I think Inley kids are able to answer that question really well.
It's an important one. It's maybe selfish when I say this, but whenever I'm in tech, right? And so I advise a lot of companies, and I'm fortunate to mentor some really great younger and so I guess in some ways also older in their career folks. And they always say to me like, "Well, how did you know what you wanted to do next?" That description you gave of like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I always ground it in. It's very similar to what you're describing. What kind of work do you want to do, and who do you want to do it with? Those are the two questions you should ask. If you can answer those, I want to do X around these kinds of people or this kind of, a knowledge set or whatever it might be, then you can go find the job. Like the job will, evolve in some capacity and you'll find it. What I'm hearing you say is at, 5, 6, 8, 10 years old, you're giving students the tools to make similar decisions. What type of life do I want to have? How do I want to exist in the world? And I'm sure in some capacity, obviously, what kind of work do I want to do? But not what do I want to be? Like, do I need to be a doctor or a lawyer and label it in some capacity? Kind of human do I want to exist as? It's so fascinating.
It is, and I think again, it's like the ability to design your own car, right? It's the gift that will propel them into the future because they will have the power to do that. And we know that kids that are graduating college today will have 12 significant jobs in their lives, right? In five different careers, and four of the five careers don't exist yet. So I think it's not a valid point to say, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because we don't even know what the future is going to look like. So it's our job as educators to ask the bigger questions, as you're talking about, to say, do you want to work on a team? How do you collaborate? Are you good at collaboration? Can you lead a team? Can you step back and be part of the team when that's part of your job, and so on? And we give our kids all of those opportunities so that they can help understand who they might want to be in the world.
And do it young. I mean, that's the part that I think is fascinating to me, and it's part of what I mean to tell my own story. But part of what drew Jen, my wife, and myself to the school was quite literally driving past and seeing a sign and saying, "Well, what is that? That looks interesting." And the fun cows and the really great campus, and we Googled the school and saw that the sort of cornerstone of it was the ideological thinking, this concept of giving students the empowerment to be. We always sort of joke a little bit because our son, his name's Ethan. I'll say his first name. Um, he's almost 4, but he presents like a 6-year-old, and he's always been a little bit advanced in that sense. And yet, he's gone to the school now, and watching him flourish into not just a creative player, which I think is valuable, the way he's more adept at taking objects and toys and such and creating little worlds, but that he's, to your point, I think you made it earlier, most importantly, around confident in asking for things, confident and deliberate in advocating for himself. And I think about even just my wife and I and ourselves and the way that we've evolved in the world. It took us until much later in life, even for me personally, like after college is somewhere around the time where I started to figure out my voice. Whereas now these students in particular, and I'm so just drawn to your statement of like 4 out of the 5 careers that they'll pass through don't exist today. Even just thinking about, I'm kind of a tech nut, tech geek, if you will, but like the advent of AI and the advent of some of these technologies that will certainly eclipse a lot of our own knowledge today very quickly. Now you're preparing students for how they can exist in the world, not how do they answer the question on a test. So it's so much more than creative thinking. It's so much more than, again, this framework that we're talking about. They are literally learning to build cars that they then get in and drive.